mathematician said this person is a good mathematician, but not a very good mathematician. Therefore, he should get tenure. Whoa! I don't know what to do with that. That was the whole letter, beginning to end. That was the letter. So one of my friends says, "Oh, I never write a bad letter about anybody, unless the word brilliant is in there, I don't really think they're good." Who knows that? So the system is just so bad now. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm not telling any, right? Does anyone think letters of recommendation are great or,
So recently there was an XKCD cartoon that told you how you can verify if somebody's PGP signature is okay. And it basically said, if they have a PGP signature, then it's okay. And this is kind of the same thing right now. If somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, and let me show you this badge," and it's, "All right, you're in." It doesn't matter what your badge is in. So,
Yeah, it won't be that way forever, because if we're going to get it beyond our community, that's the, we have to extend it. But yes, there is a little bit of that right now. Yeah.
So speaking of forever, we have a question from a remote viewer.
Excellent.
Is there a concept of badges expiring?
I don't think they have to expire because they're always dated. So you can decide if somebody's C++ is still good 10 years later, if there's no evidence they've done any C++ coding in that time. What maybe?
The badge protocol supports expiration dates on badges. So, for example, like my ham license expires every 10 years. You can build that into the protocol and it'll automatically revoke it, and you can renew it.
Cool. So that's the kind of customization. Great, that's great. Thank you. Let me see somebody else. You haven't asked a question yet.
Question, assuming this system matures, it's a fully mature system, I'm an employer, I'm looking for somebody with a C++ qualification, right? My understanding is that peer groups can set up their own badges, so I could be faced with screening through 1,000 C++ badges. So my question is, information overload. How do I evaluate a C++ badge from a high school versus one from Red Hat? I understand the metadata travels with it, but it seems like that doesn't do much to relieve the burden on the person to filter through the badges. Or did I miss something?
Probably you'd be, if you had 1,000 applications anyway, you have to read through them, and you'd be reading through a lot of pros. This is somebody has a platinum badge, which signifies that they have gotten points from everybody that they've ever worked with. That is probably a pretty efficient way of looking through, of deciding, okay, they're going to go in the look further pile, versus somebody who has 200 points.
Well, maybe I don't understand. You mentioned a platinum badge, but I thought these were peer group defined. So
they are, and you can do ratings. You can do rankings. You can do numerical rankings. Some people do images. Some of our groups don't want platinum, gold. They don't want that. They want. Actually, we have a group of Native Americans who have chiefs and who replicate the structure there. Some people have point systems. So you can identify them in different ways. But it's pretty. You can tell pretty quickly. Maybe Barry, you've got some ideas, but you can tell pretty quickly who has something special, and then you can put the special people off to the side and look further at what made them special and who decided they were special.
This is where that web of trust really comes into play. So whenever I imagine the badging framework, like this is just the way I would want it to work at the end, and have hopefully someone will do the infrastructure for me so I don't have to do it myself. But the way I imagined it is that, I can see on my resume that I got a degree in computer science, I got it from some university, and when you look at the name of the university, either it's a well-established university like NC State or it's a diploma mill, And what happens is, you're going to have reputation associated with the issuers, like, everyone who's ever gotten a C++ badge from Joe C++ college, they've been terrible employees. So then the community has the opportunity to either say this is a good institution, I can give the benefit of the doubt, or not. So I imagine some way of like filtering and then seeing, a network of like who's been with what and who works with who and who's got badges and what. And the metadata is brilliant for data analysis and visualization. It's going to be quite beautiful to see how those connections all come together.
And then the other part, a part that I'm particularly interested in, there actually may be somebody who's got a degree from Joe's C++ college who's damn good, darn good at C++, right? Whose credentials stink from a conventional point of view, but who has some real skills, and other coders who have partnered with them and collaborated with them say, this guy's code is beautiful. He really writes elegant code. I wanted to give him a badge, and I don't care if he doesn't have a degree. I don't care if he didn't graduate from high school. I don't care if he's got no school background. I want to give this person points because, wow, when I was a great coder, this guy just was so creative and so elegant and so efficient, wrote such clean, neat code. I wanted to show my appreciation. And that's how the whole world, the web architecture got built, and that's the famous story of Joey Ito. You know, where suddenly Tim Berners-Lee is finding his code improved by some 16-year-old kid dropout in Japan. And, you know, finally he's like, who are you? And, you know, it turns out this kid was brilliant and just sort of became, you know, world famous by being brilliant and not by having the normal kinds of credentials. So in that world, you track that because often you're coding with somebody you never meet, may not speak your language, and whose name you might not know. So you leave the tracks behind by doing badging. That's exactly where the system came from originally. So it's an alternative to institutional. It can be institutionally based, and it can be an alternative to normal institutional credential.
And the other thing is, of course, because the evidence is there, so I graduated
Yeah.
code, Joe's, but here's the portfolio I used to graduate. So if you don't want to look at that, you get to look at the evidence
Right.
and that sort of thing.
So that's what, well, it's where I'm talking
Right.
about, looking at the evidence is going to be a huge task.
Well,
So I-
But it is anyway.
Yeah.
How much is this program worth to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not disputing the
Yeah.
concept,
Right.
I'm thinking about it. And,
Oh,
you
it
know,
doesn't
trade-off.
it doesn't make things, it doesn't take things away, it gives it a level of veracity, particularity, minimizes the BS factor.
Well, especially if
Makes
it's-
it, makes the person, oh, here's the part I like, makes the person who awards the points also responsible. Because your tracks for awarding, if I'm Tim Berners-Lee, I love that. If I'm Tim Berners-Lee and I've given Joey Ito points, my name is on there. My reputation is on the points I've given. So it isn't just Joey Ito saying, oh, Tim Berners-Lee thinks I'm brilliant. My traces are actually there in his badge. So that's where we have the web of trust and the reputational system that's deep within the system itself. I like that.
And what's the system for protecting that to make sure that there aren't false claims?
Oh gosh, I bet that, you know, on Coursera now they can tell if you're faking it or not by keystrokes. There's going to be so many different ways of identifying. Who knows? I mean,
And webcam.
Webcam.
You do your work while you have your webcam on so they can see you're actually
Right.
there.
So it could be something like that. It could be a thumbprint. It could, you know, there could be all kinds. There could be all kinds of things. Who has an answer question? You have an answer. Ask your question.
The last point we were talking about the accountability first, and that is, since you are tying somebody who's granting these credentials to the person they're granting it to, have you seen any sort of reluctance to grant that credential? Because now you've associated yourself with that person who was a genius, may not always be a genius, and you're putting your,
Well, you know, it's
your
really,
recommendation on it.
that's a good one. When I do it with my students, the other thing they find when we then come together as a group and they see how people are badging, people will look and say, ooh, I'm a little stingy. Everybody else managed to give at least 5 badges out of the 20 categories. Somebody in the group managed to do well, and I didn't give any badges. Because most of us don't. So basically when I teach, I'm teaching evaluation. I'm teaching how you give credit and take credit, and how you learn peer-to-peer, how you learn from one another. Most of us don't know how to do that very well. And all we get is like a bad grade, or fired, or a raise. We don't really have systems in our society for learning how to learn from people's critique, or how to give critique. It's hard, right? None of us is very good. So some people will be stingy. But you know what? Then it means in the ecology they don't have much of a voice. So it may actually come to, in that peer-to-peer way, it may actually come back to bite. Their stinginess may hurt them.
In that kind of same vein with the web of trust we were talking about before, and whether you have a voice or not, how many of the institutions that now have social capital, have that reputation, what's the most surprising one that signed on to this badging?
Intel, Disney, Veterans Administration, Department of Ed. Interestingly, because I'm pretty mad at Arnie Duncan about all kinds of things, but it turns out he's working on one level that has lots to do with politics, and he's got a whole armada of people that are exploring other things below him, which is pretty interesting. Who are some of our other big partners? Google. So these are all companies that are places that are trying, whether they'll actually accept it or not. Clinton Global Initiative today made a firm commitment. DePaul University and American University. DePaul University and a possible another university in DC that they maybe accepting it as a credential. DePaul definitely has. They made the announcement today as a credential. So a number of institutions are doing this. Smithsonian.
Are they doing it mostly on the granting credentials or accepting or both at the same time?
So far it's mostly on, different. So like DePaul has said, we will use badges as part, people who have badges, we will count badging as part of the admissions we use, but we also want to use it for all of the different extracurricular activities and all of the things that don't show up in a GPA or standardized test. We want teachers to be able to do that. We want peers to be able to give those kinds of badges. And DePaul actually thinks it's going to help the big claim, the kind of moral climate there, where people actually say, yeah, he's a fraternity brother, he does chug a lot, but he's actually a really great human being who also cleans up after everybody's chugging a lot, and he's the one you can count on to make the place look okay when the parents are coming on Sunday morning. So they think that it's going to actually have a sense of civic responsibility. Because one thing about badges is it's reciprocal. There is a sense of civic responsibility. One of the things that put me over the edge and made me crazy about our current assessment systems and lots of also about society was when I gave a talk at the University of California at Irvine, and the admissions officer said, "You know what the grade point average of our average entering student at UC Irvine is on a 4.0 scale? Can anyone guess what it would be? 4.1. 4.1. On a 4.1, because advanced placement classes get weighted. There's just something so immoral to me and so corrupt about a society where you have to be better than perfect, which means you have to be safer than safe, and a robot to get into your state university. And I'm sure NC State's, it's really hard to get into any major state school right now. It's hard funding a state university. I bet it's close to that here. I just think that's a terrible thing to be doing to our youth and to be doing to our society. And to have some system that's more flexible that allows other qualities to count, and other ways of counting, instead of the very rigid ways we're developing. It's so important.
Along those lines, when I was applying, I was in Kentucky, right outside of Fort Knox, and I was applying to colleges, and talking about credentialing, it was uneven. Some places did a 4-point scale, some places followed a 4-point scale and gave extra credit for AP. So those of us coming from certain areas, the credentialing, you didn't have, it was credentialed this way, it was 4, and that was what entered in all the computers, and 4.1 beats.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah. One other really interesting thing, I've been invited by the Departments of Education of Hong Kong, Thailand, Japan, and at the end of this month, Singapore. I did a workshop for Singapore, for the Department of Singapore here, and I'm going back. All of them do great on OECD standardized testing, and everybody in those countries hates their system and knows that it's bad for innovation and creativity and experimentation, and are blown away by what happened in Finland. It's a good one to end with. Do you all know about Finland? Finland got rid of standardized testing like 20, 30 years ago. And maybe 5 years ago, the OECD came to them and said, how about if we gave all the kids in Finland the standardized test that we give to all the OECD countries, just to see how the kids would do. And the Department of Education said, sure, it's an experiment. They've never seen one. They do not know what a bubble test is. So, just as an experiment, well, sure. And when the results came back, the Finns thought there was an error, because it turned out they placed like top in the world in all these different subjects. For kids who didn't take Kaplan courses in how to do well on tests, right, who weren't being taught to the test, who had never seen this kind of test before. So everyone wanted to know what they did, and what they did is they got rid of the bell curve. It's the same time they got rid of standardized testing 20 years ago. They came with a system, well, first of all, you have to have a master's degree to teach anything above kindergarten. Teachers are well paid and professional. One day of every week is teacher day, where the teachers get together and come up with more and more creative assignments. And the teachers decide what constitutes excellence. And the goal of the year is to have every student in your class achieve excellence. Not to have the top student, not to have the worst student, to have every student achieve excellence. The students who get there first have the privilege of helping the other kids get there. And of course, what they find out is their scores were going through the roof. Instead of being bored, they become the ones who figure out creative ways where everybody in the class can achieve excellence. No ABCD grading, no standardized testing, they're number one in the world. So suddenly, these countries that are doing great in standardized testing, which the US is not, although that's, if you take out economic factors, that actually is really not true. The biggest income gap of any first world country too, and if you take out income gap, our test scores are actually pretty good. But leaving that aside, here these countries that do great are saying, well wait, if Finland's doing great and everyone loves their educational system, we better figure out what the Finns are doing. So here I'm an American who does really badly on standardized tests, going to Asia to talk about Finnish education. It's a very funny niche, but I have to admit it's really, really been interesting. So I'll be going to Singapore in August. I got this message saying, do not chew gum. Not from the Singaporean, but my sponsors.
I'd like to make a suggestion or prediction in response to what seemed to be the last 20 minutes of discussion. It seems to be about how does someone looking at a badge judge its value? And how do we filter our list of badges to be meaningful in a quick, distilled period of time? And I predict what will happen when badges succeed is that we'll see different levels of granularity and different levels of reputation, and that some badges will operate as aggregators of credentials.
Yes. Yes.
Much like the way that
Sure,
a
that's right.
degree aggregates your credentials for all of the classes that you took toward that degree.
And people will get badges for reading badges.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And for giving out good sets of points.
But, so I might be able to come to an institution that has a lot of reputation and pay them some amount of money to go through the effort it takes to look at all of the metadata on all of my badges, ask questions, contact the people who granted those badges and say, yeah, that's legit, we'll grant this badge because of these 27 that you submitted in support of that.
It's possible. It's possible. Yeah.
And likewise, I could see it fitting into the same structure that currently when a professor offers a syllabus, there will be 8 to 10 learning objectives that match a semester's worth of 3 credit hours. But I see most badges being more granular than that. And so maybe I could apply with 7 of those 10 credential objectives already accomplished to your class, and you could say, well, here's what I want you to do for these 3 that you're lacking, and once you get that, I'll grant you the badge for this class.
And that's quite possible, and it may be the negative side, but it could also have a positive side. So for example, if like lots of kids who are interested in graphic novels, to use that example, we're getting badges and awarding badges to each other. Maybe that becomes a category that's worthwhile, as opposed to a category that doesn't count for anything. Maybe that's a career. Maybe that's a job skill, for a certain person. So maybe it opens up other possibilities that we didn't even know were necessarily possible. or different ways, like when people say they're web designers, they think, wow, that's interesting that we would call that a job description. Because think about all of the different skills and the different departments of the university, where if you're really, if you're doing HCI, you're learning about design, you're doing code, you're doing aesthetics, right? I mean, there's these things that our university don't even have those in the same division. And suddenly, but we have made that a category. And we all know a good web design from, when we know a rotten one. So it's interesting the way the coalescing of something actually can create that thing, or create a need for that thing that we might not have known was there before. And for me, one of the things that's the most frustrating about being a university professor is how hard it is to be a web designer, right? I mean, how hard it is to be in a world where the art people and the HCI people and the programmers and the people who are passionate about open source or social networks or data collection, they don't even, it's like physically they're not even in the same space, even though we're in the same university. Because those things have been so we make that world. And the thing about a badge backpack is it allows you to make that world in a different kind of way. And maybe that can help actually transform institutions. Right? Enough people are saying, actually that is a world. You may not recognize that. State does, Duke less. State does, or at least, yeah, never mind. No. But it makes apparent a pattern that might not be visible before. And I think that's always, I do a lot of work in cognitive neuroscience. It's really hard to see what we don't see. Right? And until a pattern gets described, it's as if it doesn't exist. A friend of mine has the first, to go back to your comment about differently able, a friend of mine's child is the first non-speaking autistic to be admitted to Oberlin. And when Ralph and his wife adopted this child, badly abused child, who didn't speak and who was a very high autistic, they somehow intuitively, Ralph is a wonderful poet, knew something was happening and found ways to communicate with the child and found out he was brilliant and he was understanding the world. And how you suddenly can organize something that what everybody said is so mentally disabled, he will have no function in the world.
I had a kid like that who was failing, and when I took over the job in special ed, they just made him write. The kid had agraphia, and it's like I put him on a computer and I said, "Oh my God,
Totally.
you are like the master."